Now on Way 31 News at 4, the former Decatur pastor charged with sex crimes found guilty of sodomy in the second degree. Danny Dwayne Pitts will now have to register as a sex offender after being found guilty of sexually abusing a minor in his church.
A former pastor has been sentenced to the maximum prison term following his conviction in a mistreatment case. On Wednesday, Danny Pitts, who previously served at Grace Point Church in Decatur, Alabama, was sentenced to 20 years in prison after being found guilty of second-degree misconduct. The accusations that led to Pitts' conviction were initially looked at in 2007. According to reports, the victim was mistreated at Pitts' house when she was 12 or 13. The woman said that while Pitts was giving her counseling, Pitts started touching and then engaged in close act with her.
After 4 days and nearly 3 hours of jury deliberations, Danny Pitts was found guilty. The state tells me Pitts will be facing anywhere from 2 to 20 years in prison. Now, if you recall, Pitts was arrested back in November 2021 for sodomy in the first and second degree. He pleaded not guilty in March of 2022.
Despite the fact that the incident was reported soon after it happened, the case stayed unsolved for years. Pitts was arrested and charged with 1 count of first-degree and second-degree misconduct when the case was reopened in 2021. Pitts was found guilty of second-degree misconduct at his trial, but not guilty of first-degree misconduct. Pitts is still facing 4 other allegations from a different Tennessee investigation, according to WHNT. 2 counts of battery by an authority figure, 1 count of statutory mistreatment by an authority figure, and 1 count of statutory mistreatment are among those charges. It's about time that we got the justice that we all deserve, Pitts' victim told WAI following Pitts' conviction. Referencing the trial, he added, "It has been single-handedly the hardest thing I've done in my entire life. This was just validation for myself and all the other victims that he has been accused of hurting. Today we not only got justice, we also got validation." Chief Assistant District Attorney Garrick Vickery told Fox 54, "We are glad that this victim was able to get justice for what this defendant did to him. The case took a long time to get to a courtroom, but this victim made sure that Danny Pitts received the punishment he deserved." Pitts was the pastor of a church that has closed forever. He will have to register as an offender after completing his sentence. Meanwhile, this year marked the 100th anniversary of a church with a long history in West Michigan and congregations all over the world. Rather than commemorating their centenary, the Protestant Reformed churches in America are currently grappling with the private sin of mistreatment and decades of covering up for perpetrators, such as school instructors and church leaders. The Protestant Reformed Church, or PRC, was accused of breaking state laws requiring clergy and educators to disclose mistreatment in a recently released study that Target 8 was able to get. The investigation revealed numerous instances of mistreatment within the PRC. Even recently, leaders of a PRC church in Ottawa County urged members not to disclose mistreatment within the church or within church families, according to a police report that Target 8 was able to obtain. The pastor of that church was found guilty of mistreatment in 2022 after being accused of inappropriate behavior by adolescent girls. The church's reaction, according to survivors of mistreatment in the PRC, has made it much harder to forget the trauma and the memories. In 1990, John Bilsma was 14 years old when she began to be mistreated by her basketball coach at a PRC school in Ottawa County. She said, "I was very angry at God. Very angry at God. I didn't understand how if what I was taught and what the Bible says, he's a kind, loving, trustworthy, all-powerful, everywhere powerful God, then he was in that room, in that car, every time she put her hands on me." A guy known as Case Number 1 claimed that beginning in the middle of the 1970s, his 6th grade teacher at Hope Protestant Reformed School in Walker mistreated him over the period of 6 years. "She raped 13, said the man, who is now 62 and disillusioned by the church's response. "I was willing to end everything, like I looked forward to it," said Heidi Voldhuis, who said she was mistreated by the same 6th grade teacher in 1979 and kept the secret for decades. She added, "I was that lonely, and that lost, and that alone. My date was picked. September 27, 2021 was going to be my last day on earth." Jessica Camps, 30, of the Byron Center neighborhood, recently displayed a picture of herself with her grandfather, a PRC church senior, whom she said mistreated her on several occasions when she was a little girl. "So this is me and Jack is holding me," she said, referring to her grandfather by his first name. In 1924, the Christian Reformed Church split off to form the Protestant Reformed Church, or PRC, which was established in Grand Rapids. About 8,000 of its followers are dispersed among 32 congregations in the U.S., with roughly nearly 1/3 of them located in West Michigan. At its annual gathering, Synod 2023, last year, the church's 20-member governing council decided to hire a third party, Guidepost Solutions, to conduct an investigation into the decades-long mistreatment and cover-ups that have caused division within the organization. The church spent $358,000 on the probe, which lasted for over a year. Woldhuis, one of the survivors, said, "I literally thought because they hired them, that in and of itself for this denomination to do was mind-boggling. Like we celebrated the day it passed, and that they said, yes, we're going to do it. Like we celebrated." In addition to interviewing survivors and others, Guidepost established a hotline and carried out a survey of the entire church. However, church officials made a radical change at this year's annual conference, Synod 2024, where they narrowly decided to condemn the study and declare that they never should have hired Guidepost in the first place. Some church leaders were concerned that Satan was using Guidepost to do harm to the PRC. A church leader called on Guidepost to change its ways of supporting and promoting the LGBTQ+ community. Because of this, Guidepost will not look into particular instances in the churches and its schools as it should. Rather, the pastors and elders of each church, known as consistories, will look into claims within their respective places of worship. Some survivors wonder if that will ever happen. The Reverend Ronald Kamenga, an advisor to Synod, said, "Leaders decided that the investigation of sin is a matter for the elders of the church." Kamenga said, "They have the responsibility and they have the calling, so the elders in the local churches have to handle this." The turnaround suggests the church is more concerned with safeguarding itself than children, according to Reverend Clayton Spronk, pastor of Faith PRC in Hudsonville, who backed the third-party study. "That's what it comes across as, yes," he said. According to him, there is no assurance that church authorities will take the necessary action and notify the police of any further accusations. He said, "No guarantee, but that's what they're required by law and by the scriptures to do. When it comes to objectivity, I was convinced, I think many of us are convinced, this is something that has to be looked into by someone else. It's just the nature of an institution that you're going to want to protect yourself." He said, "If you look at the decision carefully, we're affirming the evil of the sin of mistreatment. We're affirming the importance of investigating this sin, but then not proposing any way to actually investigate the sin. We're only shutting down the one investigation we have going." A history of misconduct claims in 29 of the church's 32 U.S. congregations was detailed in the Guidepost study that Target 8 was able to access. It found 43 offenders and those who handled mistreatment claims improperly in those churches. That figure was not broken out in the study. Additionally, 45 examples of mistreatment involving the church's schools, some of which were in West Michigan, were discovered by Guidepost during interviews. Spronk said, "I've known since I was in seminary that the Protestant Reformed churches had a bit of a problem with mistreatment and handling it, so to find out that this report is confirming that is not a surprise." Sadly, the church, and this is true in every church, all of the sins that you find in the world are found in the church. Ronald Van Overloop, a former pastor in Ottawa County, was the only accused identified by Target 8's research to ever face criminal charges. The Guidepost report cites churches and institutions' failure to legally report allegations of mistreatment as one of the causes. Teachers and priests are required to report. "I think there's this need to protect the name. We need to protect the PRC," said the survivor known as Case Number 1. Instead, according to Guidepost, when faced with allegations, the church has relied on the Bible. Matthew 18:15 reads, "If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over." Some interviewed by Guidepost were taught that ministers and elders were appointed by God to be leaders, so how could a person say anything bad about them? According to the report, it is a male-only church where women are not permitted to vote on church issues or hold any positions of responsibility. Some victims, like Heidi Woldhuis, who claimed to have been mistreated in 1979 by her 6th grade teacher, Hulda Kuiper, at Hope Protestant Reformed School in Walker, remained silent for at least part of that reason. She said, "Where was I going to go and who was I going to talk to? I learned how to disappear, just disappear." At least 5 young kids were mistreated by her attacker over a 50-year period, according to church reports. Hulda Kuiper, who was 90 years old when she passed away in 2022, was never accused of a crime. According to Spronk, the Faith PRC pastor who backed the inquiry, he has had conversations with roughly 10 survivors of mistreatment from the denomination, and he said, "In my mind, the mistreatment they suffered is horrific, and I can't think of anything worse. But almost all of them, and I believe all of them I have asked about this, will tell me and say that the mishandling of their case by the church hurts more." That's astounding. According to Spronk, he has also had relationships with a number of the people the church has named as mistreaters. One of them was a member of his church. He interned for another, and another allegedly raised his own children. What hurts the most is the church not having your back, said Bilsma, one of the survivors, who felt the message she got from the church was, we're done helping you and you need to heal, you need to move on, and you need to go on and be a mom and a wife. The conviction for mistreatment of longtime preacher Ronald Van Overloop served as a catalyst for the Guidepost probe. I remember it feeling weird and it feeling wrong, said Elisa Mulker, one of his victims, for mistreating a young one while counseling her at his parsonage at Grace Protestant Reformed Church in Ottawa County. Van Overloop was sentenced to 45 days in the Ottawa County Jail in 2022. At least 10 times, one girl told authorities from the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office he asked her to sit on his lap, touched her inappropriately, and kissed her on the lips, sometimes while discussing the love of God, usually at his parsonage, and other times when his wife was home. The mistreatments on the girl began in 2009 and continued for 4 years, according to police reports, although they weren't reported until 2021. It was too late to file criminal accusations at that point. However, other girls shared similar accounts. According to a police complaint, one told them Van Overloop fondled himself while he was counseling her. Eliza Mulker, who is now 25 years old, claimed that when she was 16 or 17, Van Overloop stroked her legs improperly during a counseling session in the pastor's study. She said in court that he held her in a long, awkward hug while stroking her leg. He was found guilty of mistreatment because of her case. Ronald Kamenga, a former PRC pastor, told Target 8 that Van Overloop had at least a dozen victims. At Van Overloop's parsonage, witnesses frequently saw parents dropping off underage females. Girls were sent to him for counseling by pastors from other congregations. He reportedly provided counseling to Covenant Christian high school ladies. Mulker said, I remember adults saying, oh, he just has such a passion for working with young people. Oh, he just really loves kids. He'd go around after church giving us all hugs. According to the police report, victims were reluctant to come forward because church leaders have been very intentional about encouraging their constituents not to go to the authorities when mistreatment occurs within families or the church, so that the church would deal with it privately. Van Overloop, according to the police report, had told church leaders they are not to go to authorities about reported misconduct. Mulker said, the environment they created made me feel like I would not feel safe coming to them with that information, so I just went to the detective. According to Mulker, she was invited to meet with church authorities. Mulker said having an older man violate you in some way, and then having a bunch of other old men like, oh yeah, come tell us about this, and oh yeah, he might be in the room when we have this conversation. I was like, no, I'm not gonna do that. Mulker claimed that although she no longer attends the PRC, some of her relatives do. It made church become like a very stressful environment that I didn't want to be in anymore, she said. Van Overloop, a 75-year-old Georgetown Township resident, was let go by the church in 2021 after victims came forward. When a Target 8 investigator came to his house to speak with him, he slammed the door. Next is the case of Don Faber, a longtime churchgoer and former elder, which is described in a Grand Rapids police record that Target 8 was able to get. The report claims that Faber confessed to mistreating minors 10 years prior after being approached by a male member of Grand Rapids' First Protestant Reformed Church in 1998. 5 to 10 other male victims were identified according to the church. However, there is no proof that the church called the police. Rather, 10 years later in 2008, a woman, who was not a church leader since women are not permitted to hold leadership positions, called the Grand Rapids police to report the attacks. Faber was 72 years old at the time. The report did not include the woman's name. In 2013, the same woman who first alerted the police called them again, asking why Faber was still ministering at the church. James Slopsema, the pastor at the time, declined Target 8's request for an interview, but stated in an email that a public announcement was made to the church explaining Don's sin of mistreatment and his repentance in 1999, the year after church leaders became aware of the accusations. Don took ownership of his sinful criminal activity and was deeply sorrowful, the pastor wrote in the email. He said Faber apologized to his victims and as much as possible to their parents. Slopsema claimed that since the statute of limitations had already passed, he didn't call the police at the time. He refused to elaborate on the specifics of the mistreatments or explain how he was aware that the statute of limitations had passed. Because the alleged mistreatment occurred at Faber's Spring Lake cottage, outside of their jurisdiction, and because the incident wasn't reported until 2008, Grand Rapids police stated they decided not to pursue the case. They also cited concerns about the statute of limitations. Faber, who is 88 years old, resides in Walker with his spouse and is still a member in good standing in the PRC. When Target 8 knocked on his door and asked him about the allegations, he responded, "That was taken care of 25 years ago," and then shut the door. The church has named Jacob Lenting of Beecher, Illinois, Jessica Camp's grandpa, as one of the accusers. She said, "I loved my grandpa. If I ever had an issue in life, who did I call?" According to a church report, leaders at Crete Protestant Reformed, located south of Chicago, were only recently made aware of Lenting's history of mistreatment of young ones, including his own granddaughter. His granddaughter said, "He wore a mask where I thought he was one of the most godly men. He knew how to talk about the Bible." According to his granddaughter, he occasionally mistreated her while she was napping at his house in between Sunday services. She claimed that the worst of the things began on her birthday. "It was a Sunday. It was my 5th birthday," she said. When she initially told police and church leaders in 2019, she was 26 years old. The church claimed to have notified Illinois' Child Protective Services of it right away. Lenting was finally excommunicated. "I was believed and supported by the church, whereas some of these other victims weren't," Camp said. Lenting's church detailed the accusations in an open letter, claiming that he lured children into the church lavatory and exposed himself, as well as raping minors, including his own grandkids. According to the letter, church authorities claimed to have initially heard of a dozen victims, but later discovered that there are many more, and that his victims span many decades. According to a police report that Target 8 was able to obtain, one lady came forward in 2020 following a nervous breakdown to claim that Lenting had mistreated her in his basement when she was young. She talked about having nightmares and recalled the room's cuckoo clocks chiming and chirping during the incident. According to that estimate, there were up to 30 victims. In March 2024, Lenting's church issued a written apology for its errors. Among them, after learning about the accusations in 2019, the church pastor waited a month to take any action. It took leaders almost a year to alert churchgoers, and even longer to alert neighboring PRC churches. The church wrote, "We grieve over the harm our failure has caused. We grieve with all who were so wickedly groomed and victimized by this man who was often an elder in our church and was called to guard the flock, especially the little lambs." According to Illinois court documents, Lenting was imprisoned for 2 days in late 2021 for breaching a protection order that his daughter, Jessica Camp's mother, had sought. He admitted touching his own daughter as a teenager and becoming aroused by massaging his grandchildren's thighs, but he denied raping his granddaughter in a polygraph he paid for and passed, and that Target 8 was able to get. According to the Reverend Spronk of Faith PRC in Hudsonville, Lenting targeted his own daughters. Spronk knew Lenting well at the time, having served as a pastor in neighboring Lansing, Illinois. Spronk said, "Jack Lenting would come to our house almost every time that he knew I'd be out of town. Usually he'd say, 'I have my granddaughters with me. Can your daughters come with me to McDonald's?' And we've come to find out that if your children were in the car with him, he was doing different things, already trying to touch them and break through boundaries, things like that." The Cook County State's Attorney's Office declined to press charges against Lenting in March 2024. In an email, a spokesperson informed Target 8 that the agency lacked sufficient proof. She wouldn't go into further detail. "I can't think of anything more that you need when you have 4 victims who are willing to testify to mistreatment," said Camps, his granddaughter, adding, "I can't imagine there's more." Even the church, in a report, criticized the state for not pursuing the case. "We believe the justice system has failed at many points in this case and do desire that one day he would be convicted for his crimes." Lenting, who is currently 79, resides in Beecher, Illinois, which is south of Chicago. Target 8 caught up with him as he was leaving his home. When asked to deny the allegations, he said, "No, I'm not going to talk about it." Even now, his granddaughter struggles on her children's birthdays and refuses to celebrate her own. "I've always hated my birthday, absolutely always hated it," she said. So that's all from today's video. If you enjoyed it, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and ring that bell icon so you never miss our upcoming videos. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments section.